All right, so topic for this next class is about counting crime. Basically, how do we know how much crime there is? And, given our methods for figuring out how much crime there is, well, what do we know about crime? Is it going up? Is it going down? Um, how does the U.S. compare to other countries? Does Minnesota compare to other states? So that's what we're going to talk about today. There's basically three ways of measuring crime that we have in the U.S. Uniform Crime Reports is UCR data. We have self-report and victim surveys. So we're going to talk a bit about each one of those. UCR data is what you almost always hear about on the news. So if the news says crime's going up, crime's going down, murders increased, almost all that data comes from the annual release of UCR data, and it's collected by the FBI from police agencies all across the U.S. So almost all police departments report their data to the FBI. The FBI compiles it and releases it in a report called Crime in the U.S. And that's usually what the media picks up on when they say crime is up or down. UCR data is based on a unit of per 100,000. So just, put it in context, 100,000 people is about the size of Duluth and Superior. So, if the homicide rate is right now, it's roughly 5 per 100,000. If our area is like the national average, we would expect 5 homicides in our sort of local area every year. So Duluth and Superior should experience about 5 homicides if we're close to the national average. What else? UCR data is aggregate data. So it's reported for all U.S. cities. It's reported for SMSAs, which stand for Standardized Metropolitan Statistical Areas. So like the Twin Cities area would be one SMSA. And you get it for the U.S. as a total. So the other kind of gem to come out of UCR is something called the clearance rate. So the clearance rate is a rough measure of how well the police or how effective the police are at solving particular crimes. So it's rough because it's just the overall number of crimes known divided by the number of people arrested for that particular crime. So if there is, 100 burglaries and 20 people get arrested for burglary, you would have a clearance rate of 20%. And so it's sort of a measure, and we'll talk about it when we talk about deterrence theory. It's a measure of how certain punishment is, and that's how folks have used it. UCR data is divided between Part 1 and Part 2 crimes. When you hear something in the media, it's almost always about Part 1 crimes. So the 4 violent crimes are homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. One of the common mistakes people make is to mix up robbery and burglary. So robbery is a violent crime because it involves the use of force or the threat of force to take your property directly from you. So if somebody mugs you on the street, that's robbery. If somebody breaks into your house when you're not home, you haven't been robbed, you've been burgled. So burglary is when somebody breaks into your house, you're not there, and they steal your stuff. So robbery is sort of a property crime, but it's also a violent crime. So the 4 sort of when what often gets released is called the Serious Violent Crime Index, and the Serious Violent Crime Index would be these top 4: homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. So that's the uniform crime data. Again, it's the data that is collected by police. So if you think about what that means, right? That this is only data that is police recorded. That means for it to count in the UCR, a crime has to happen. Somebody has to report that crime to police, and police have to record it as an actual crime. If any one of those 3 things don't happen, it doesn't get counted. And so the so-called dark figure of crime is all the crime that's not captured in UCR data. And the biggest reason it's not captured is because people don't report crime, right? So again, it depends on the crime, right? Most homicides do get reported to the police, and so that's going to be the most reliable crime figure in the UCR data. But if you think of something like assault, right? And assault is literally, somebody punches you, or even in some cases threatens to punch you, can be considered an assault. how many times does somebody get punched or threatened in that way and not report it to the police? It probably happens more often than not. Think of theft. Somebody steals something from you. If it's like a $50 item, are you going to take the time to call the police and fill out a report and do all that other stuff? And there's a variety of reasons people don't report. Sometimes they're afraid. Sometimes it's the crime committed by a significant other. But for a variety of reasons, a lot of crime doesn't get reported to the police. You know, like drug crime, right? How many drug crimes get reported to the police? Very few. And so if you look at UCR data on drugs, so you're going to capture essentially arrests for drugs, that's going to have more to do with what the police are up to. If the police crack down on drugs, that's going to spike up. But it's not really going to reflect how many people are using drugs in the U.S. or in any particular area. Aside from that, and that's the biggest issue in UCR data, is that crime that's missed because it doesn't get reported to the police. There's a couple hiccups. One is something called the counting rule. So if I, break into your house and I steal a bunch of stuff and I kill your dog, I don't know, I do 16 different crimes. In the UCR data, only the most serious crime is going to get counted, and so you're going to lose some crimes in that sense. The other issue is that the UCR data is wholly dependent upon individual police agencies being honest in their reporting. And so from time to time, police departments have gotten caught sort of fudging their data. If the mayor puts a bunch of pressure on the police agency to make crime go down, they can essentially, through sort of manipulating police reports, try to make crime go down. The issue is it's fairly, if it goes too far, it's pretty easy to catch because the trends that are happening all over the U.S. suddenly are reversed in one particular city, and that's not going to go long without getting caught. So again, UCR data is crime collected by agencies, municipal agencies, usually county agencies all over the United States, and it's reported to the FBI, who compiles it. The future of UCR data, they've been saying this since I was in college, is that we're switching over to a new system called NIBRIS. NIBRIS sort of eliminates some of these hiccups that are in the UCR data, so it's still crimes reported to the police, but instead of crimes, it's now incidents. So in the scenario where I break into your house and commit 5 other crimes, that would all be one incident in NIBRIS that is broken down into the several crimes. So it's more detailed information, but so far it's being used only by sort of pointy-headed academics and not by the media. The media still reports the UCR version of the data. All right, so the second source of information we have for crime is self-report surveys. And self-report surveys are literally people just asking other folks about crime and whether they've committed crime. And it wasn't until the 1960s that we sort of got serious about doing that. Prior to that time, folks thought, well, who's going to tell us about crime they've committed? But it turns out if you ask people and you guarantee that their answers are confidential or anonymous, that they will tell you about crime. So almost all self-report data is sort of mom and pop data. It's individual researchers that have specific questions, and so they get a specific sample. We don't really have a national level self-report survey that we can use to kind of compare with the UCR data. So the big advantage of doing this is that in addition to asking people about crime, you can ask them about anything else that you want to. So if you want to link something like IQ with crime or self-control with crime, really the only way to do it is to measure both self-control or IQ and crime at the same time. And so the only way to do that is with self-report. Like UCR data is going to be of no use if you want to sort of understand individual differences in crime. The other use we have, and so we don't really have a national level data crime system of self-report. The closest we come is something called Monitoring the Future. And so for victimless crimes like drug use or prostitution, the best way to get this is self-report. And we do have, since the 1970s, the Monitoring the Future data is high school level data about drug and alcohol use. So each year we get a random sample, a probability sample of American high school students, and we ask them a ton of questions about drug use, alcohol use, and that's sort of some of what that's what I had you dig around in for the assignment, or you're going to dig around in it if you haven't done it yet. So here's an example of a study that Rob Widener and I did at UMD. And so our interest was in prescription stimulant use. So how many UMD students are popping Adderall or Ritalin to party or to stay awake to study? And then we asked about, because once you ask, we asked about other illicit drugs. We asked about Vicodin and other painkillers. And so, I can confidently say that about half UMD students smoke weed or have done so in the past year. So that's a relatively common example. We wanted to know the extent to which college kids were using this and which sort of students were. We also asked about cheating. And so this is a great example of the duh factor in criminology, that when you ask people, like, how do you think students are cheating? They will say stuff like, well, they plagiarize stuff from the web, they got illegal copies of the exam, and so on and so forth. But by far and away, the most common way that people cheat is they look at their neighbor's exam when they're taking it. So that's just an example of self-report. As I said, the monitoring the future, and I'm not going to click the link and show it because you're playing around with that for the assignment. But that's our sort of only national level self-report instrument for collecting data. And you'll see if you poke around in there, drug trends have like crime trends. They've sort of waxed and waned. Marijuana has become more popular, less popular. It just depends on particular eras. New drugs get popular and then they sort of wax and wane as well. The big disadvantage of self-report survey has to do with who we survey. The easiest groups to survey are high school kids, college students, those sorts of folks. And the problem is that the people we're most interested in as criminologists, chronic offenders, hardcore offenders, aren't necessarily at school when you go to survey them. They're the least likely to sort of fill out your survey. And so instead of being in high school, they're getting high behind the rec shed, and they're not there to fill out your little form. And so the other sort of related issue is the kind of questions we asked about. So this is a good example, right? I asked about all this different sorts of drug use. Am I going to ask a group of college kids whether they've ever killed somebody? No, because the odds are nobody in my college class has ever killed somebody. And the other problem is, what do I do if they have, right? If I've guaranteed anonymity or confidentiality, and I know that somebody in my class has killed somebody, it creates this sort of ethical problems. So because of those reasons, we tend to ask about less serious forms of crime, truancy, drinking, drug use, theft, those sorts of issues. And the concern is that it's kind of two different domains, right? That's different than armed robbery or homicide. So, people can lie, people do lie. We've devised ways to try to figure out how many people are lying and the extent to which they lie. One of the more innovative ways was that a group of high school kids, after they finished their survey, we said, hey, next door is a lie detector, and every one of you is going to be subjected to a lie detector test. Do you want to change your answers before you go in that room? And there was no lie detector test. There was no other room. But what they did is record how many people changed their answers and which way. And it turns out the vast majority of people don't lie. And the ones that do sort of can lie in each direction. Like some people make themselves more criminal and some people make themselves less criminal. So we're fairly confident that lying isn't sort of a critical issue when we do self-report stuff. If you do it right, if you guarantee people anonymity, that we can't track you down and the consequences are coming back to you, people are pretty honest. So that's self-report data. We go out and we just ask people about their crime. The third source of data comes from same research methodology. We go out, we get a sample of people, we ask them about crime, but instead of their own crime, we ask them whether they've been victims. And the upside of that is that people may be more willing to report victimization than they will their own criminal behavior. And so unlike self-report, we do have a national level national level victimization survey. It's called the NCVS, National Crime Victimization Survey. And this is really our best check on UCR data. So the two big sources we use to track crime in the U.S. are the UCR, which are crimes reported to the police, and the NCVS, which are it's a survey of American citizens, probability sample. And that allows us, using pretty simple math and statistics, to sort of project how many actual crimes have happened. So the obvious huge upside of the NCVS is you capture all crime, that you get crimes that are reported to the police, crimes that are not reported to the police. In fact, this is the way we know how many crimes get reported to the police. So one of the things that are asked, if you report a crime, you report that you've been victimized, you've been burgled. The next follow-up question is, did you report to the police, and if not, why? And so all our information about why people report or not comes from NCVS data or other victimization data. So we do every year since the 70s get a sample of folks and ask them about their victimization experience. There's some obvious limits to this. It can't track homicide. It's fairly obvious. The only victim of homicide you could interview would be a ghost, I guess. It is it's a household-based survey. So one thing students ask is, well, if I call a household and you interview everybody over 12 years old, wouldn't that pick up, if my sister or spouse has been murdered? But that doesn't work because we only ask each individual about their own victimization experience. So we don't ask a household member about another household member's experience. So you can't get at homicide. And the other issue is there's some crimes that are unrealistic to sort of get at, the so-called victimless crimes. And you're doing a victimization survey, think about asking somebody, have you been a victim of marijuana use? And yeah, right now, man. That's not going to work. So we can't really pick up on drug use or prostitution or those sorts of things. But we can get at a lot of crimes that sort of cross over to UCR. So we can get at like robbery and burglary and those sorts of things. The other issue is that for most crimes, you're not going to have much information about the offenders, right? So if your house has been burgled, and they say who burgled it, and you're like, I don't know. So you get no information about who did it. Now, some crimes do have information. So if you were a victim of robbery, and remember, robbery is taking somebody's stuff using force, we can get some information about, how old do you think they were? Do you think they were white, black, Hispanic, and those sorts of basic information. So the big limitations of NCVS has to do with like what crimes we can assess and what we know about the offenders of those crimes. So what do we have? We have three sources of information to get at crime in the U.S. Our UCR data is our police data. It's crimes known and recorded by the police. This is aggregate level data. It tells us about cities, states, metropolitan areas, and its biggest use is looking at crime trends, right? So we know every year we're not going to get an accurate count of the number of assaults that have happened because a lot of assaults don't get reported to the police. But you have that same issue every year, right? Every year, assault's going to get underreported. And so you expect that the trend, even if the level isn't right, the actual trend is going to be pretty close to what's going on, right? If every year, 70% of assaults aren't reported, you can still see year to year whether assault is going up or down. So its best use is for crime trends. It's not going to be a good indicator of the number of actual crimes that happen. Self-report data, its big use is it's as individual level data. So it links the offender to all the things you think might cause crime, right? So you can ask about self-control or peer groups or whatever you want and ask about offending. And that allows us to link those two things together to see whether they're correlated. NCVS is the counterpart to the UCR. So the NCVS and self-report are both survey data. Here we're asking about the person's crime. Here we're asking about the person's experience as a victim of crime. Like the UCR, the NCVS is aggregate data, and so that allows us to see crime trends across time. In fact, one of our big comparisons is the NCVS to the UCR, and most of the time, the long-term trends for those things agree fairly closely. So it allows us to sort of check one with the other and be confident of what actually is going on. So, all right, well, that's sort of how we know about crime. I want to stop here in case I horribly mess up the next part. I don't have to make a new video. But the next part is going to be about sort of what we know from all this information.